Welcome back to Gospel Chats with Ryan and Marshall and Keeley. We're so grateful that you're here. Thank you for joining us as we wrestle with the gospel of Jesus Christ. We're just going to jump right in. We've been going through the 10 commandments, and it's a new commandment today, number 5. Ryan, take it away. You ready to lead out?
I think so. I want to comment on your jacket first, though. It looks good.
It's like wearing a hug. It's not a jacket.
Wearing a hug.
It's a It's a sweater jacket thing.
That's what it kind of looks like. It's like a cardigan turned into a jacket.
I know. It's almost like a smoking jacket, but I don't smoke. Section 89. So. But
said that emphatically. You thought there were some people who actually believe that you might.
I never know, right? But no, it's
not one of the 10 commandments. You're good. Sweater weather. You
sweater
look good.
weather. Thank you so much. That was so kind.
Okay, back to the commandment. Sorry, I just wanted to comment on how good that you look.
Well, thank you.
In that commandment number 5.
Number 5.
Okay, Exodus 20 verse 12 reads.
All right.
Honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee.
Okay.
Okay, let me read this quote from Elder Oaks to set the context.
Right.
I want to get your thoughts on this. Speaking of the 5th commandment, he said, the commandment to honor our parents has strands that run through the entire fabric of the gospel.
Okay, that's big.
I have never thought about the 5th commandment that big. Never. I mean, I've thought about it, I've taught it, I've thought about different implications that are maybe more than the typical conversation, but that's an apostle just saying, not only is it more than maybe we typically think about, it has strands that run through the entire fabric of the gospel. Now, let me give a little bit more,
okay,
because then I'm just going to turn it over to you and be like, okay, it only has to do with everything in the gospel, so where do you want to go, Marshall?
All right, sounds good.
He continued and said, it is inherent in our relationship to God our Father. That's interesting to tie it into there.
Yep.
It embraces the divine destiny of the children of God. This commandment relates to the government of the family, which is patterned after the government of heaven. So this 5th commandment seems like it's tied into some very eternal things. Our relationship with God, our eternal destiny as families, parents, children. Mm-hmm. Okay, so give me your just first thoughts of this 5th commandment that it has strands that run through the entire fabric of the gospel.
All right. Well, I love that you started with that quote. I love that you took us there because I knew we were going to be talking 5th commandment this week. And so one of the thoughts that I kept having as I'm looking at this is this is one of the few commandments that has a promise attached to it. And that promise that thy days may be long upon the land. Now, you can read that as a very temporal thing, but as I've been sitting on this commandment for a week, I'm starting to read that more and more as eternal family language, as an eternal idea. You know, that thy days may be long upon the land. One of the promises of the covenant of Abraham was inheritance of a land. The Lord promises in his Sermon on the Mount that the meek shall inherit the earth. And I'm seeing some of these things, that this idea of understanding and being able to create a cohesive and well-running family unit is a key element. Well, not just a key, is the key element of God's plan. That is God's plan. The family is God's plan, and knowing how that operates, how it works, and putting something in place to help us be able to take it and run with it and make it last and make it meaningful is extremely important.
That's good. That's good. It's cool to put it in that context to see that something about honoring mother and father has much more to do with this eternal purpose of the entire plan, which is eternal families.
Right, absolutely. And I think, and I love the language that we have here, that honor thy father and thy mother. There's a very, I mean, we were talking about this before we even started filming, this idea that this commandment can be taken in a number of different ways. It can be abused. And I think it's very distinct that God gives the commandment to honor your father and mother, and not necessarily to obey your father and mother or to do everything they tell you to do, because there's a very different way. If I'm honoring my father and mother, and as President Oaks says right there, this idea of taking it to my relationship with my heavenly parents, to honor them and to honor my own family is a very different set of things that I'm going to be doing as a child than just running through the house and doing whatever dad tells me to do type thing.
It is interesting that the commandment doesn't say, obey thy father and thy mother. Now, there are other scriptures.
There are, Paul talks about that, right?
Paul does, yeah. And so let me just jump to that because the way that Paul quotes it in Ephesians is interesting. Ephesians 6, 1 through 4, Paul says, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right.
and that's a huge modifier right there.
It really is. And so we'll come back to that. And then he says, honor thy father and thy mother, which is the first commandment with promise. So again, he points out that idea of the promise, that for some reason, there's something about that at least caught Paul's attention, that this one's attached to a promise. And then he goes on, that it may be well with thee, and thou mayest live long on the earth. Again, maybe eternal earth, a celestial
earth, yeah.
And ye fathers, now this I think gets into the conversation too, where yes, the commandment is to children on how they honor parents, but Paul definitely ties into, but parents, that's not licensed to misuse this commandment, because he says, and ye fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord.
Yes.
So there's a lot there, and so let's play with the word honor for a second. What does it seem to mean? What does it not mean? Like when you think of because out of all the words that God could have used, I think honor is an interesting one.
It is.
So give me thoughts. With the word honor, what do you think? What do you like about it?
I am all over the map on this. And, and I was doing some research on the commandment and the cultural things going on at the time. And there's a lot of talk about this is very clearly children, you need to make sure and take care of your parents as they get older, right? There's no social security safety net in ancient Mesopotamia. In the middle of there's going to be someone who needs to take care of elderly parents. That's you, kids. Honor your father and their mother. And we see that come up in this culture that Jesus talks about, of this idea that there's an understanding that you need to be taking care of your family. And as a result, then your family will take care of you type thing. But I feel like it goes so much more beyond that, of this question of, if I'm honoring my parents, I'm living the very best life I possibly can. We talked a couple of weeks ago on the name of the Lord in vain of we have names, and I have my parents' name. It's attached to me. It's attached to everything that I do. And so what I do will either bring honor to them or it will not. And my parents live in the same town as mine. My parents are awesome, by the way, so I'm just going to shout out to them. It's easy to honor my father and mother when they're wonderful people, but that there's people that mention to them all the time that they know me or that they've run into me or that what have you. And there's plenty of opportunities for people to, if I was not living a certain life, that they would not necessarily be honored by who I was. And so my first thought is the best way I can honor my parents is to live a godly life. If I live a life that's worthy of honor, worthy of God's honor, then my parents are honored because I share a name, I share a family with them, and whether or not they're good people or not, they will be honored by the fact that I'm living a godly life.
I think that's a great definition and explanation of honor, because I think there are obviously many people that have come from different homes where maybe parents were making choices that in and of themselves were not very honorable.
Yes.
And where a child could, even as an adult child, could think, to honor my parents, does that really mean that I need to obey what they're doing or live as they're living, when that's not honoring your parents necessarily, right? The most honorable thing we could do is to live a life that is worthy, to live a life that is righteous. And even if parents aren't quite living that way, that I think is still getting at the heart of the fifth commandment, which is live a life that, regardless of what their choices are, it would bring honor to them in the eternities.
Yeah, which I think goes back to President Oak's, Elder Oak's quote that you started with, this idea of strands throughout all of the plan, and even attaching us to our heavenly parents, of, am I honoring my father and my mother in that way? And the simple fact of the matter is there's no such thing as a perfect parent on this earth. My parents aren't perfect. They're wonderful, and goodness knows for my poor children, I'm not perfect. Sue's not perfect. We're trying and making mistakes, and I hope that my children honor me. And frankly, I hope one of the ways that my children honor me is that they are better than I am. That when they are adults and when they're living their lives, that they're better than I am, that they don't make some of the same mistakes that I do, that they get rid of some of the bad habits that they saw in me.
Which, again, if we're thinking eternal, not just in the moment, that is a beautiful way to honor parents because I think it can change parents.
Yes.
Can we go? I was just thinking of different scripture stories of what honoring parents might look like, and this one's a little different, but I thought of Nephi in a couple different scenarios. So I want to start in 1 Nephi 2, verse 16, and then jump a little bit later in his life. But early on, I think we see a more typical version of Nephi honoring Lehi and Sariah. So Lehi has this vision, right, that we got to leave. We got to pack up, leave all of our possessions, leave all your friends, leave everything you know, and go out in the wilderness to a promised land, right? Visionary dad, seeing things. And in verse 16, I think, and I don't want to read too much into this, but there's just a way that Nephi says it that I think is really telling. It says, "It came to pass that I, Nephi, being exceedingly young, nevertheless being large in stature, and also having great desires to know the mysteries of God, wherefore I did cry unto the Lord, and behold, he did visit me, and did soften my heart, that I did believe all the words which had been spoken by my father, wherefore I did not rebel against him like unto my brothers." Now, again, I don't want to read too much into that, but the very fact that he had to pray for his heart to be softened, I think implies that there was some hardening when he first was approached by his parents saying, "We're leaving as a family," and so many different ways that I don't know how old he was. I picture him as a fairly young teenager. I don't know. In my mind, he's 15, 16-year-old Nephi. I don't know if that's right or not. But that would have been super hard. And I think I love the choice that he makes. I think honoring your mom and dad in some ways, trusting that if your parents really are trying, they're not perfect, but if they're righteous, you trust their inspiration, which can be hard. My mom's inspiration kept me from going places later with certain friends when I really wanted to go sometimes, but she might not have had a good feeling or thought it was too late. But I think honoring them is to say they know some things. Yep. They have been there, done that. They are entitled to revelation for our family, maybe more than I am a child. Right? So I think he honors him in like a very typical, awesome way here, where he goes to the Lord and says, "I want to honor my father and mother. They're telling me this is what's there." And the Lord softens his heart, and so he doesn't rebel.
Yeah.
Right? We okay with just that?
Absolutely.
But then here's the backdoor honoring. Like if you, I don't know if that's a phrase, I'm going to coin that. Backdoor honoring the mother and father is chapter 16.
Yeah, of course.
Right?
The broken bow.
The broken bow. So pick it up where? Verse 20-ish maybe?
That sounds about right.
Pick it up in verse 20, 1 Nephi 16. "And it came to pass that Laman and Lemuel and the sons of Ishmael did begin to murmur exceedingly because of their sufferings and afflictions in the wilderness. And also my father," this is the first time, we know they murmur about everything. Laman and Lemuel, the sons of Ishmael, they're always murmuring, but this, "And also my father began to murmur against the Lord his God. Yea, and they were all exceedingly sorrowful, even that they did murmur against the Lord." And as I've tried to put myself in that situation, Nephi could have responded so many different ways. I think my natural, honest reaction, if I were trying to live a righteous life at this point, if I'm Nephi, and now my dad is starting to join in the murmuring, I would just go my own way.
Yeah.
I just do my own thing.
Well, and he had the power to. He's made his bow. He's made his arrows. He knows what he's going to do. But
it's interesting what he chooses to do, how he chooses to approach this. Again, he could just do his own thing. He could chastise his dad and kind of give him the, "Well, heck with you. I can't believe you." But of all the things we get, verse 23, "And it came to pass, I, Nephi, did make out of wood a bow, and out of a straight stick an arrow, wherefore I did arm myself with a bow and an arrow, with a sling and with stones. And I said unto my father," out of all the things you can say to him when dad is murmuring, "Whither shall I go to obtain food?" Give me your thoughts on how is that keeping the fifth commandment, and what effect does that have in this bigger realm of like eternal families?
For me, right away, is Nephi still is seeing his dad as the father. He's in charge of the group right there. He's presiding. Family proclamation. He's presiding over what's going down in the wilderness right here, and he's seeing his dad, and he's seeing his dad with weakness, and yet his dad's weakness does not deny the fact that he's still dad.
And still deserves
honor.
Whatever that looks like.
And I find it fascinating that, like you said, he doesn't go up to him and say, "Dad, you know better. Dad, you shouldn't be murmuring. Dad, you shouldn't be doing this." No, it's "Dad, can you help me?" And that, frankly, in terms of honoring parents, that's a beautiful thing to get from a child is a request for help, is a request of I trust you. Can you help me with this? Where should I go get food?
Which I think unlocks a huge blessing, which is, again, the standard ideal way, I think, of keeping the fifth commandment as that parents are living honorable lives.
Yes.
And so it's easy to honor them. Maybe not always easy, but like Nephi,
Yeah.
I want to have a soft heart. I want to believe that they have my best interest in mind. I'm going to obey. I'm going to try and follow their counsel. But to know that they're fallen humans and that sometimes their judgment is wrong, sometimes their choices are wrong, sometimes their heart's in the wrong place, or whatever's being manifest, but to bring honor to them by treating them not as they are, but as they could be.
Yes.
I remember a principle that Harold B. Lee used to always teach. He would say, if you treat people the way they currently are, people tend to stay that way. But if you treat people as if they had become their best selves, they have a tendency to start to become that.
Yes.
Right? And we do that in so many areas, but I think that's an interesting one to think about. I could do that with my parents.
And
it's easier to do in other relationships maybe, but it's like, with my parents, that one's hard. They should have it all figured out. They should be the good ones.
Well, and I think that's part of is as I was thinking the same thing. This moment of we do that and we teach it, see others the way that Christ sees them, and we tend to just out of default exclude our own family from that conversation.
Yeah,
for whatever reason, which and especially parents, like you said, because in some ways, and we joke and I joke with my kids, and it's the truth of when you go to your parents' house, no matter how old you are, you sort of become a kid again. Mm-hmm. You walk into mom and dad's house and you're a kid. Doesn't matter if you're 47, 48, 49, 50.
You're subordinate.
You are.
In some ways.
You are now a child. And so there is still that idea of my parents should know better. They should be better than this. And that's such a dangerous place to be when it comes to honoring somebody of this idea of like, no, they're imperfect, and God gave the commandment to honor father and mother, knowing that there were no perfect fathers and mothers on earth to be honored.
He didn't put in an escape clause that says, unless they make unrighteous choices. Again, now I might not need to obey them in those moments, but could I still honor them?
Yeah, and I think bringing honor to them, once again, of living a good life, honoring the name that they give. And I think there's another part of this, and this is something that's been sitting with me, is this moment of there's no perfect parents, and there are some parents who are absolutely horrific parents. And then there's another part of this whole conversation of honoring father and mother. It's different for adult children than it is for children at home as well. The simple fact of the matter is children who are at home do not have a complete brain yet.
And sometimes the ones who leave home.
Sometimes for at least 7 years after they leave home.
Science says so.
Science says so. But that moment of the Lord is actually teaching us a really powerful principle of sometimes it's really important to learn from the people who go before us. And I think looking now in the culture in which we live, we're living in a culture that is very, very fond of youth, very fond of throwing away the ideas of those who came before, calling them out, even the fact that we use an entire generation label as an insult. Okay, boomer, like that is literally us just being rude to you because you're old.
Yeah, and dismissing all of your experiences, all your thoughts, all your knowledge, because generationally I must know more than you.
Because and I've been thinking about this, and there's a quote that sort of stuck with me, and I made sure to get here today. Hopefully my phone will work for me to do that. It's from G.K. Chesterton, who was a philosopher in the early 20th century. He says, "Man should be a prince looking down from the pinnacle of a tower built by his fathers, and not a contemptuous cad perpetually kicking down the ladders by which he climbed."
Yeah.
And I think of that, and I see this, and I think honoring my father and mother is a way I do that. Is if I'm honoring them, I'm going to take whatever things they built before me, and maybe it was a palace that they built for me that I get to stand on. That's a wonderful blessing on my behalf. And maybe it wasn't. Maybe they didn't build a lot, but they gave me something. And maybe what they even gave me was, hey, this is not the way to live life. But I can honor them by building on what has been given rather than going around and spending my time destroying what was already there. I'm going to paraphrase poor Winston Churchill, and hopefully he doesn't come back to haunt me, but that idea that
I'd be scared if you
I
did.
know, right? I mean, apparently I looked like him as a baby, but so does everybody. So, but now, but when the present picks a war with the past, the loser is the future.
Yeah.
And I think we do this all the time. If I'm not busy honoring my parents by trying to build on what they've given, but I spend my life trying to tear down what they have and to prove that they were wrong, or to prove that they were inappropriate, or to prove that they were bad, that's a wasted life on my behalf. I can look at them and say, well, I'm not going to do that, but I can also look at them and say, okay, what was given? Now I'm going to build on that and make myself better than what was put before me. And talk about honor. If your parents were awful and then you go live the very best life, what an honor to those parents that you decided to take what was given and make incredible things with it. And so from the fifth commandment is a very individualized commandment, but it also feels a very entire societal commandment, that thy days may be long upon the land. I honestly, truly believe that part of this commandment is the Lord saying, if you want to be successful in the promised land, you cannot sever your ties from history. You cannot sever your ties from the people that came before and gave you everything that you gave. And we see this coming up in Deuteronomy before they enter the promised land, where Moses says that you're going to come in here and you're going to have vineyards that you planted not and houses that you built not. And the Lord's biggest fear is that you will forget that you didn't make these things. You didn't get these things. Well, I'm sitting in a world where I didn't make it. I was given an awful lot by my parents, and all of us were. Even those with bad parents, we were given something.
We're given life. If that was the only thing to honor them for, they gave us a chance to have this moral experience. They gave us life.
And so that needs to be remembered, and that life needs to be honored, and the best way to do it is to live my best life.
That's good. I think of the effect then that it can have in the present and in the future to make that choice to honor my parents no matter what. Whatever the upbringing was, in Lehi's case, within that very chapter, it changes Lehi's life.
Yes.
Nephi, because he chose to honor his dad even when his dad was showing weakness, it helps Lehi become who Lehi really was, and his best version of himself. And sometimes we might not see the immediate responses that way as we try to honor parents, but I think when this plan is all played out, in the eternal scheme of things, how many families are going to be saved because children chose to live honorable lives, that somehow that is going to reach back to parents and grandparents? I mean, even just think of what we do in the temple now.
Yes.
As we do that holy work, I think we believe in the idea that honoring my parents can bless generations.
Yeah.
I honor them by turning to Christ. I honor them by making covenants. I honor them by extending covenants to those who maybe didn't even make covenants. Yes. And there's just, I don't know, there's something about that fifth commandment that is like saving generations probably when it's all said and done.
Well, and I think what we see in 1 Nephi 16, where you took us, is one of the greatest ways that Nephi honors his father, is Nephi gives his father an opportunity to repent.
Yeah.
And that's an honorable, that's a beyond honorable thing to do, is to look at someone, to know that they are imperfect, and to also give them an opportunity to change and to grow and to become better. That's a powerful thing, as you said. And it's interesting. I'm very blessed with my parents and my family. When we go to the temple to do temple work, Sue and I, we always have family names, but they're always Sue's family, because she's the first real member of the church in her family. She's honoring her parents. She's honoring her grandparents. She's doing all of this by doing exactly what you said. She's not throwing away her heritage. She's not walking away and saying, oh, you guys are all nutso and we're not going to do this. It was, no, now that I have this, I'm going to live my very best life with Christ and see if I can bless all of you and give all of you a chance to be better, a chance to get blessings that maybe you were missing out on.
That's powerful. Like either way, then that brings honor to parents. If my parents are living righteous lives, me trying to live a righteous life obviously is exactly what my parents want, right? That's the greatest joy that we can find in our kids, as you start to see them to choose Christ and to choose covenants and to keep them. But if my parents aren't choosing that, me choosing Christ and choosing covenants is still honoring my parents and giving them that opportunity. Let me throw this in, and it's kind of it's right in the middle of all this, but again, just another practical experience. So I had a student in my office again, and so good, and was willing to open up a little bit of her home story, and basically started the conversation with, for years, my dad demands respect from all of us in the home and gives none. What do I do with that? And she talked about the strained relationship and how it's gotten to the point where she just wants distance. And again, I don't ever want to tell anybody what they should do in their home, right? So I have no idea. And being a dad's hard. And so I kind of tried to give her just a view from a dad's heart, a little bit of like, we're just faking it. We're trying, And so I did. I know there was part of me that encouraged her that, let your dad repent. But if he doesn't choose that, then you're going to have to choose, how you react to that. But what would you say in that? I like putting you on the spot. Then I measure
so
how I did in my own office. I'm like, oh, I need to go call her back to my office and tell her something different, or I was on the right track. Give me your thoughts there, and then Keely jump in.
It is so hard because one, when you have a situation come this way, you don't know the full story. You don't know his story. You don't know her story. And we all come from our different angles and our different ideas and our different experiences and how they come together. For me, I come back to what you said is part of honoring father and mother. It never means, especially as an adult child, that you need to be obedient to your parents. God never says that, especially if your parents are going to Paul. If your parents are not in the Lord,
be obedient in the Lord.
That's an issue thing. Like, I'm an adult. I have my own life. I follow Genesis 2 to the letter, right? Leave your father and mother, right? Like I've done it. But there is that honor of the power. There's always a chance to give them an opportunity to repent. And I think that's our first stop. And it always has to be that way. And if we're going to be fair, part of honoring father and mother would also be following the Lord's command that we are commanded to forgive all men. That doesn't mean that we have to put ourselves in bad situations. We have to put ourselves in abusive situations. That's not what that means
at all.
But part of that honoring process is to honor the fact that the atonement of Jesus Christ can work for mom and dad just as much as it can work for anyone else, and that he may learn. And he deserves a chance to learn and a chance to grow. And then you can figure out, I'm never going to tell anyone exactly how to figure out how the relationship goes around that. I will say this, I read just the other day a news article that shows that currently approximately 25% of millennials have gone no contact with their parents.
Wow.
Now, I'm boundaries are a good thing, but you read that and like, that's too much. That's way too much. That's a society that has completely forgotten the fifth commandment.
Okay, I want to lean into that because Keely, jump in.
So just going along with what Marshall was saying, it just made me think of the talk from Jeffrey R. Holland that talks about the ministry of reconciliation. Yeah. And he talks about, you forgive, but like in the middle of his talk, he's like, now I just want to be clear, you don't have to go back to an abusive relationship. And I think that it is important to know that like it is okay to distance from your parents, but like Marshall was saying, but sometimes it can be too much. Like at what point do we say like, I've given them enough chances and I've done everything that I can? And I think that does have to be a personal choice, but I do think it could be easy to just like give up. But I think that God, he wants us to strengthen our relationships and he wants us to be able to figure it out. But it's hard if there's abuse because you don't want to be stuck in that and you don't have to be. But I think that it can be easy to just give up and be like, they're never going to change. And that might be the truth. Sometimes your parents will never change. But if it's like abuse is one thing, but if it's just that they're difficult to deal with, then you do have to just kind of like hope that at some point Christ's atonement will change them. And maybe that won't be until the next life. Maybe that won't be until we're in the celestial kingdom,
Yeah.
But
or maybe it's just little teeny bits here and there, but no dramatic Alma the Younger moment, but they're changing, but it's slower than we want.
Yeah. In one of my classes at the college when I was getting my bachelor's degree, my whole class was about family communication. And we spent 2 days on the topic of parent and child estrangement. And knowing who my professor was and kind of their ideals, they were definitely pushing of like just don't do it. Like, just don't even be with them. Like, this is totally fine, just like estranged. And once again, that's okay. But like, I believe in the power of change. I believe that Christ can change people. And if I have to give up some things and sacrifice some things, then that's okay, you know?
Okay, I'm glad both of you, you're both making me feel better about a conversation that I never really had at least voiced it the way you both just voiced it. She started talking about her therapist, and the whole conversation was about setting boundaries. And I understand boundaries. Like, there has to be place for boundaries. That's a very real thing. But I found myself saying something and I'd never said out loud, consciously. Again, I kind of had some thoughts, but I said, but I'd be careful with setting too many boundaries. Yeah. You might boundary yourself right out of a relationship that could become sweet and beautiful. Because I think that is the default reaction of this generation, maybe more than any others, is because maybe we haven't addressed abuse seriously enough in the past. Now maybe as you know what I mean? Yeah. I think because we haven't done as well in that past, we've talked very much about boundaries and how healthy boundaries can be, which again, yes, and if abuse and anything there needs to be certain boundaries there. But how often are we using boundaries as an excuse to stop keeping the fifth commandment?
Yep. And boundaries is an excuse, as Keeley said, to stop doing hard things.
Yes.
And I think, and I love how you put it, like they might be really difficult to get along with. And the simple answer, and my first thought, and maybe it's because now I'm a parent, and I was like, yeah, well, maybe you're difficult to get along with. but I think there's a beautiful thing, and I'm going to throw one of my children under the bus in a good way. But
that's an interesting statement right there.
Use their name without their permission. But you know, my third child has left the church, has very different standards than us, very different lifestyle than what we taught, these types of things. And one of the most beautiful parts about this is this kid very much keeps the fifth commandment in so many ways. Incredibly respectful at our house, incredibly respectful of what we believe and how we act, and incredibly respectful. We're working, going both ways, right? We're trying to go both ways, but there's a power that comes from, rather than saying, oh, we're on different sides of the team now. We have different beliefs, we have different cultural values, we have different religious values. Let's just put up our little wall, and it's going to be a lot happier. And to be fair, that probably could, make things a lot easier.
In the short term.
In the short term.
Yeah.
But the keeping of the relationship is so much more powerful and so much more what God wants. And I think, once again, we've said this before, but God is a God of relationships.
Yeah.
And those family relationships, they're eternal. They matter in ways that I know that we don't fully comprehend how much these family relationships matter. And we need to be willing to just throw ourselves at times into sometimes difficult relationships. We might not, have the exact same likes and dislikes and personality traits as our parents, or actually sometimes it's really difficult because we are a lot more like what they are than we want to admit that we are.
Yeah, yeah.
I think that with growing relationships and becoming better together, I feel like that's the closest that I've felt to God, and like the closest, or like the most that I've seen him in my life, because he is in the middle of that relationship, helping on both sides. Because like you said, I didn't mean to phrase it that the parents are always the problem.
Oh no, I wasn't big on you. I know exactly what you're saying.
Like, I know that it goes both ways, but like, I even just think about like Eisen and I, my husband, we've been married for 4 years, and just the growth that I've already seen in those 4 years, like, is beautiful. And it's the closest I've ever felt to God. And it's just like, it's amazing. And you don't want to take away that chance for God to manifest in your life by cutting off a relationship.
Yeah, exactly.
I was going back to a story I've thought about for a long time. Again, it's from President Harold B. Lee, and President Packer is the one who shares this story. President Packer was with President Lee at, I don't know if it was a state conference or something, but they were approached by a young man who was about to be deployed in the armed forces, and he asked for a blessing from President Lee before he was going off to war, and President Lee said no. Not period. Yeah. He said, no, I think your father should do that. And the young man said, my father wouldn't know how to do that. I don't want him to do it. And President Lee said, no, I really think your father should do it, so here's what you should do. go home and grab a chair and tell your dad, Dad, I'm going to sit in that chair and you're going to lay your hands on my head. And then you're going to say whatever comes to your mind and heart. Can you imagine being this young soldier, like going off to war? Like, I mean, he's worried about his own life, and he's turning to the priesthood for blessings. And a prophet is doing an interesting thing that even as the prophet of God, he's directing him to his parents, to his father. And President Packer said that it was a couple years later that somehow he ran into the same serviceman who was home. And he shared the rest of the story. And he went home and he did exactly what President Lee told him to do. And he said it was so healing and it was a blessing to the relationship for both he and his father. And that there's just something, if ever there was a worthy work to do that can be very hard, especially because it is family, that's the hardest work to do.
Right.
But it's that work of, to honor my parents, especially when it's hard, is probably when it could be especially beautiful because it's going to take more than me. I'm going to have to rely on the atonement of Jesus Christ to help me in honoring my parents and in them honoring me and my agency. And it's tricky. That commandment really takes different shapes and forms as we age.
Absolutely.
Right? There's a way to live the fifth commandment when I'm young and in their home. It's interesting on what it looks like when I then leave their home. And there's still some things where I still respect kind of their experiences and their inspiration, but I have left father and mother, and so and then as they get aged, one of the things I read, it was really powerful talk, was, and I can't remember who it was from, but it was a member of the 70, and he was talking about to honor parents in their older years is to help them be as independent for as long as they can. And again, my brain's fast forwarding a little bit to think, wow, because I know it might be easier to just let's put them in a care center or that's a big responsibility to start to take upon old aging parents.
It is.
And to care for them financially, emotionally, spiritually, physically. But then he went on and shared a bunch of stories on how a care center, an old person's home, their primary responsibility is to care for their physical needs. But then how many parents are in those kind of places without visits, without love, without emotional connection, because children don't want to. I know that's not there. I know there's a million decisions that go into that.
Right, there's so many.
Right, and there's a time and a place.
Absolutely, there is.
But again, it's just it planted in my brain a really beautiful thought to say the fifth commandment is going to be eternal.
Yes.
And how do I continue to live that in the most Christ-like way in whatever stage me and my parents are at? It's just interesting that the fifth commandment is really eternal.
And I couldn't help as I was preparing and thinking about this conversation we'd be having that my mind kept going to section 128 and the welding link that Joseph Smith talks about, that we don't fully understand the connections that we have between families, in our families and in this life. We don't fully get it. And there's no way we can. It's such a big thing. And I think one day we will see, and we'll see just how key this is. And come back to, I think, as Keeley said, this idea of our relationships matter so much. And we've been given an opportunity to have relationships from the get-go. And some of us have been incredibly blessed with parents who worked hard and loved the Lord and tried their best. And some of us have been plopped in a universe that seems deeply unfair and deeply wrong, but all of us have been given an opportunity to create relationships, to grow, and to do these types of things. And there's a power that comes from that just can't come from anywhere else. And if we sever those links, well, by golly, we better be thinking really hard before we I've got a boundary, you're gone. Yeah. That's got to be a really big with the Lord decision. And I think what we're seeing here, and this is with every commandment, and we've seen it with all the commandments we've talked about, is we need the Savior by our side, helping us, his power, inspiration from the Holy Ghost to know how to live this commandment. Because it's one of the top 10 for a reason. It's not just, the Lord didn't, he was picky in the 10 that he chose to make the top 10.
Yeah. And again, I've seen some people divide the 10 commandments into kind of the two great commandments that Jesus talks about: love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, might, mind, and strength, and to love thy neighbor. And they all place the first 4 commandments under commandment number 1, right? Those first 4, which is really interesting. But then 5 seems to start off this list of things that we can do to keep the second great commandment, to love our neighbors ourselves. And out of all that list, he starts with, start with your home, start with your parents. I think that's
neighbor?
interesting. Yeah, who's your neighbor?
Who's your neighbor?
Those 2 that gave life to you.
Yes, they're your neighbor.
And we don't think that way. I don't think typically. My brain, when I hear neighbor, I don't first go to my parents.
And if I hopefully I don't get in trouble for this, but when
I kind of hope you do.
No, sorry. That's all right, because you don't have to honor me. No commandment there. But But you think of the Savior's, when he's asked the question of who's my neighbor, his response is the Good Samaritan. And I can't help but think, but the priest and the Levite, they had healthy boundaries.
Yeah, they boundaried themselves right out of a chance to
serve God's children,
to love. Again, because boundaries
and boundaries.
Anyone listening to this, I think we've been clear enough that there's a time and a place for physical safety, emotional well-being. If there's abuse, boundaries are a very real thing. But and right, maybe the and is better, a better term than but you better be careful that you don't get sucked up into a barrier boundary culture out of the very purpose of life.
Right. And when exaltation is a family affair, I really hope you haven't put up a bunch of boundaries around yourself to become alone.
Yeah.
And there's obviously there's all of the ins and outs, but this moment of there's every reason not to stop and help the Samaritan, or to stop and help the guy who's been beaten up on the road to Jericho. There's every single reason not to. But every once in a while, what happens when you have a parent who has not been the best parent, and all of a sudden they're old, they're infirm, they're not who they used to be, and they've been beaten up by life and beaten up by their own choices. In many cases. And maybe the boundary is not go and put yourself in danger, but maybe we lower the boundary and they deserve a phone call, or they deserve a text, or they deserve a funny meme. I don't know what it is.
Whatever might heal that soul.
Right? Like there's this moment of, okay, can I do something to help alleviate your pain? Because you are the giver of life to me.
That's good. Let me just end with this story for my part, and then anything else you would add. But as I thought about this commandment, I thought about something, and my bishop didn't share this with me until after I'd gotten home from a mission, which is interesting because it happened 6 or 7 years before. When I was a teenager, my mom did a pretty good job. After a while, she would start to take us boys by herself. My dad would stay home, and my mom still had some issues with gospel living, but she would take us. And I had a good deacon's quorum advisor, a lot of fun and spiritual, and I wasn't used to spiritual things, right? And not a whole lot of that was going on at my home, at least at that point in life. And so I really liked this, and I knew we were getting a new bishop. And even at like 12, 13, I remember just kind of thinking, well, I hope they call Brother Shumway. I really like him. And Brother Shumway ended up being Bishop Shumway. And unbeknownst to me, I got along really well with him, and my brother, just older than me, a year and a half older, he got along really well with the new bishop. And this is the part that the bishop didn't share with me until after my mission. But right when he was called as bishop, the first person he wanted to go after was my dad. He's like, Larry Wilkins, I'm going to go over there. I'm going to challenge him. Like, come on, your wife's here. Your kids are here. Like, get your act together, Larry. Let's get you going. And he said he had the strongest spiritual impression. Leave him alone. You'll get him through his sons. I don't know if it would have been helpful if he would have told that to me or not. That might have felt like too much pressure because I don't know what I would have done with that. But fast forward over the next couple of years, the brother just older than me really set some things in motion. He chose to serve a mission. And then that led to me thinking about, and I chose to serve a mission. My parents weren't able to go through the temple with my brother who served, but it did give this bishop, who had by that point developed a friendship with my dad, it gave him a chance to sit down with my mom and dad to say, well, Ryan's going to go too, and it would be really awesome if you could be there with Ryan in the temple. And my parents changed something, especially my dad. My mom was much further along, but my dad just like rocket ship. And my parents were sealed in the temple the week before I went through the temple. So my dad was my escort. The first priesthood blessing my dad ever gave was giving me the Melchizedek priesthood and ordaining me an elder. And I just looked, and then after I got home from my mission, the bishop shared that little revelation that he had. And I thought, in an ideal world, it should go from top down. It should be parents always teaching the ideal way to live the gospel of Jesus Christ to their children. But in God's plan, sometimes it can work the other way. Sometimes it's, well, my parents were great, like hard work, being honest, loving people. Like they taught me those things from the very beginning. But it was kind of empowering. It was kind of neat to know that in trying to honor my parents by living a righteous life, that by keeping that commandment, it could have influence on them. It could invite the atonement of Jesus Christ to heal them personally and heal us as a family and to become an eternal family. And so I hope anyone out there who's listening who maybe it's not the ideal family situation or the fifth commandment feels hard for whatever reason, I just am a big believer that if we'll try to really keep that in the most righteous, Christ-like way, that God will do work. God will heal families as we try to keep the fifth commandment.
Absolutely.
I'm a believer.
I am too. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you so much. This has been so good.
Thanks for the conversation.
Thank you so much. Thanks for joining us. Hope to see you again on Gospel Chats.